Hi, in this video we will discuss how to create a dynamic web application using Java EE technology. We will first show you the steps and concepts needed to create a simple web application, which acts to bring you up to speed before we demonstrate the digital bibliographic library, where we cover some of the important standards we have used in our Assignment 2 project, such as implementing a control servlet for the model view control architecture pattern. We will also take note of several critical web application components such as the data layer access and data storage layers. In addition to the Java EE technology, we will also use Eclipse as our development environment, Tomcat7 for the server container, and MySQL as the database provider, which will be run through XAMPP. All in all, we hope you enjoy the Assignment 2 solution video. We've created the project in Eclipse for the dynamic web application. In addition, we need to specify the server environment which the application would be run on. If you're using Tomcat7, as do we, it is important that you specify the target runtime when setting up the project. Also remember to have Eclipse generate a web XML file. Most people are familiar with the presentation layer of a web application. This is where content, both static and dynamic, are displayed. A web application can do that through JSP pages, which contains code that specifies how content is displayed. Here we create a simple Hello World JSP page. Simply typing Hello World into the JSP achieves this task. We run the application on a Tomcat server container and see an error. This is because the default welcome page is not set to go to helloworld.jsp. So let's fix this and set helloworld.jsp as the welcome page in the web XML file. After the change, the server has a JSP file to go to each time the application is called. You can see that this time helloworld.jsp was correctly loaded. Hello world indeed. Now let's go on to create a second JSP page. Let's name it name.jsp. We use it to capture a user input from the Hello World page and show how an application does with the user input. First create the page, then in the Hello World JSP we add an HTML form for user input. Under the form, set the action attribute to go to name.jsp. When this form is submitted, the user inputs will be sent alongside the request to name.jsp as request parameters. After receiving the user input, we can use Java EL expression language to display the parameters. Here we can see that referencing the param.usename field, get the user input parameter from helloworld.jsp and display it in the name.jsp page. Trying this out, we can see that by putting our name in the input field, we are redirected from the form to the name.jsp and the parameters are displayed, which means it's successful. Now let's add another form to redirect back to the original Hello World JSP homepage. As you can see, we can easily use the form tag to redirect and switch between different pages in the web application. Now say we want to store the user's name in the application rather than to constantly ask the user for a name. To do this, we use what we call a bean. A bean is a Java class the application uses to send and store information the application needs to run. Here we create a new user bean to store the user's name. It is very important to ensure that your bean implements serializable. Now let's add the fields that we need, which are user ID and the name of the user. Every field in the bean has to have getters and setters in order for the JSP pages to use the bean. Back in the JSP file, we have to use the JSP useBean tag to signify that we are using the bean. We have to set an ID as an identifier in the JSP since there may be many useBeans and a scope. The scope will determine the lifespan of the bean since its creation. Here the session scope means that the bean will persist through the session of the user. When this page loads, it will check if this scope specified has the bean. Otherwise, it will create a new bean for that said scope. To use the bean, we use the expression language to display the information from the bean. We also want to be able to set the name in the bean. So go to the name.jsp where we previously displayed the name parameter from the request, and now instead call a method on the bean to update the name. Let's call it setNewName. this method would have to return a string to allow the displaying of a new name. Back in the bean, we just have to create this method, and now we can see that by inputting a name, we can see that it sets the name and persists it when we redirect back to the home page. Now let's say that we want to add a header to all the pages that we have so far to make things prettier. Instead of creating a header and copying and pasting it to all the pages that I have, I could simply create a header in a separate file and include it within the respective JSP files. This will import and include the header file in my JSP, so I don't have to rewrite the same thing every way. Now, as we've seen previously on the Hello World page, the hi sentence is continuously outputted, even if there are no current users yet. What we can do is to use the JSTL library. First, import the related jar files, then specify the C tag and include the C tag as shown here. Now demonstrating it, we can see that the hi doesn't follow at first, where we don't have a user, but after we input our name, it identifies a user as a registered user and greets us. How cute! Today, most websites are data-driven web applications. This is not surprising because 1. We live in an information age, and 2. Data is value. In a data-driven application, the data, or information, is the most single important feature. The richer the data, the better the web application at its job. All interactions in a data-driven application are very reliant on data and access to databases. We can establish this because 1. Data is stored in databases, and 2. Users want processed information which comes from the data present in databases. We now cover the MVC, the Model View Controller pattern. This will answer many of the questions that you may have, such as where are these data-driven operations conducted? How is the data passed all the way from the client to the server? How does the server even remember anything if everything happens in a stateless protocol? Pay attention because this is important, and this is how we made assignment 2. A key player in the persistence of data is the Java Bean. The Java Bean stores values relevant to the user's dynamic needs, and it persists the data long enough for it to be valuable. Here is an example of a working bean. Commonly used values such as the user ID, found in multiple instances in a web application, can be stored in a bean since the first point of login. If the bean is set to live in a session-wide scope, it can be persisted and easily retrieved throughout the user session until the user effectively logs out. JSP pages and servlets contribute to these beans, and together multiple beans form the model of the application. Most of the view happens in JSP pages. The view functionality is needed to perform 2 key web application functions. One is to return response data from a specific request action, and 2 to submit new action requests. Pages such as user detail page and view shopping cart / wish list pages by themselves do not know what to display, and the only way that they can do so is by relying on the bean in the model part of the model view controller. Any beans used here are explicitly specified depending on the permissions of the page. Other pages submit action-specific information, which come in the form of parameters. Pages such as registration page and the item registration page pass parameters and information to the servlet. Parameter passing can happen in various ways, such as through GET, POST, or URL parameters, depending on which one's convenient. To be able to submit an action request, there must be a button for the user to trigger. These buttons are common, such as the Add Shopping Cart button and the Add Item button. Lastly, the controller carries out all business logics. When the application is running, a controller waits to parse incoming application requests, but there are many different application requests. In accordance with the command design, hidden parameters are present in all forms that initiate actions or operation. For example, with a hidden parameter called action, the values of this hidden parameter would then dictate what kind of business logic that the controller would execute. At this point, the controller has all the parameters / necessary information needed. These parameters are either explicitly provided by the JSP or can be found in beans. For most business logics, an SQL statement is issued to the database. The results returned are then stored in beans, updating the model and advancing the state of the web application. Thank you very much for watching this video, and we hope that it inspires you to build your own data-driven applications.